The training ground was alive with shouts and the pounding of boots across the dirt as Private Morales struggled to keep up with the relentless drills. Her eyes darted nervously as Sergeant Thompson towered over her, and in a sudden flash of anger, struck her across the arm, leaving the crowd of trainees frozen in shock. But before anyone could react, a messenger ran at full speed toward the officers' quarters with news that would change everything, leaving the trainees whispering in disbelief. Morales stumbled back, clutching her arm, her heart racing, and her vision blurred as she tried to comprehend what had just happened. Around her, the other recruits exchanged frightened glances, some stepping closer in support, while others seemed frozen. In place, afraid of drawing the attention of the sergeant, who now stood rigid with his jaw clenched and eyes burning with fury. The sun beat down on the field mercilessly, and sweat ran in rivulets down the faces of everyone present, adding to the sense of pressure and chaos as the commanders shouted orders that seemed to echo off the surrounding walls of the training facility. The wind kicked up dust in small clouds that made it hard to breathe and added an almost surreal haze to the scene, making it difficult for anyone to think clearly or move without hesitation. Despite the shock, the training continued in a mechanical rhythm. Some trainees moving through drills almost as if in a trance, following instructions while their minds replayed the incident over and over, and whispered questions filled the air. Who would step in? Who would stop this? And would there be consequences that might ripple far beyond this day? As Morales tried to regain her balance, she felt a sudden surge of anger and fear mixing in her chest as she realized that what had happened was not just a personal affront, but a violation of everything she believed training and discipline stood for, and she clenched her fists, not knowing if it was for courage or for revenge. The other recruits seemed to sense the tension and fear spreading through the ranks, and whispers turned into low murmurs, each person wondering if they would be next, if the sergeant could unleash his temper on anyone, or if somehow this moment would mark the beginning of change. Something in the air shifted, and Morales could feel it like electricity. The anticipation that something bigger than themselves was about to unfold, and that the eyes of the higher command would soon fall, on them all, making every heartbeat echo like a drum of impending fate. The sound of boots running in the distance drew everyone's attention, and suddenly a young messenger burst onto the field, his face pale and his chest heaving from the effort. He had exerted delivering news that seemed to make time slow as the words reached the ears of those in authority. The officers paused mid-step, the commotion around them fading as they focused on the report carried in like a tidal wave. And Morales felt her stomach tighten with a mix of fear and hope at the realization that someone powerful was now aware of what had just occurred. The sergeant's expression flickered briefly between defiance and apprehension as he noticed the subtle but unmistakable signs that the situation was no longer entirely in his control, and the crowd of trainees seemed to hold their collective breath, waiting for the inevitable storm that would descend from the top. As the messenger backed away, a hush fell over the training ground, and the sun glinted off helmets and equipment, creating an almost cinematic glow that heightened the tension, making every movement and glance feel monumental and consequential. In the distance, the faint roar of vehicles approached, a sound that carried authority and inevitability, and every trainee instinctively knew that this was not just any officer, but someone whose presence alone could command obedience and instill fear or reassurance, depending on how the situation was handled. The air was thick with dust, sweat, and adrenaline, and the nervous energy of everyone present mingled into a palpable force that made it hard to breathe or move without careful calculation. Morales shifted her stance slightly, feeling the weight of eyes on her back and the lingering sting of the strike that had interrupted her routine, making her pulse pound faster and her thoughts race uncontrollably with scenarios both frightening and hopeful. The sergeant's shadow loomed large. Over her, despite the space between them and his rigid posture, suggested that he was aware that his time to act unchecked might be coming to an end, leaving him tense and unpredictable as a predator, sensing the approach of a higher predator above him in the hierarchy. The whispers among the other recruits grew louder, but were carefully controlled, each trainee fearing to speak too openly, yet desperate to share the anxiety that gripped them all as they realized that this moment could define the culture of the training facility and send ripples through their careers and lives in ways they could not yet understand, but were already feeling with a mix of dread and fascination. Every crack of a boot on the dirt, every shout of an instructor, seemed amplified in the charged atmosphere, making the ground itself feel alive with tension and anticipation. And Morales felt as if she were standing at the edge of a precipice, peering into unknown depths, where everything she had trained for and believed in could either collapse or rise with the intervention that was surely coming. Her mind raced through every lesson she had ever learned about discipline, respect, courage, and resilience, trying to find the right balance between fear and strength as her body trembled slightly with the combined effects of exhaustion, adrenaline, and lingering pain. And she could see that the other recruits were grappling with the same storm within themselves, some visibly shaken, some hiding their reactions behind practiced stoicism, as if daring the universe to test them further. The distant rumble of approaching authority grew louder, and Morales could feel it in her bones, the certainty that someone powerful was about to impose justice, or at least demand an explanation that would alter the course of what had just transpired and make clear that no one in the training facility was above scrutiny or consequence, even those who wielded rank and strength with arrogance and impunity. Her eyes scanned the faces around her, seeing a mixture of fear, curiosity, and anticipation reflected in every gaze, and she realized that the moment had transcended the physical strike she had endured. It had become a crucible that would reveal character, integrity, and courage of everyone present. The ground seemed to vibrate slightly with the momentum of incoming vehicles, and she could almost hear the heartbeat of the facility itself syncing with her own pulse, as if the entire place were holding its breath, waiting for the arrival of the figure whose reputation alone commanded immediate attention and whose decisions would leave no room for delay or misjudgment. The horizon shimmered in the heat and dust, and then a shape emerged. The unmistakable silhouette of black vehicles cutting through the chaos like a blade through fabric, and every eye followed their approach as the gravity of the moment descended upon the training field like a storm cloud promising upheaval change and revelation all at once, and Morales felt a mixture of awe and fear that made her knees weak and her hands tighten involuntarily, leaving her suspended in a moment that seemed endless yet fleeting. At the same time, within minutes, a convoy of sleek, black vehicles rolled onto the dusty training field, and the sound of engines vibrating against the hard-packed earth made every trainee freeze in place. Their eyes widened, and whispers died instantly as the unmistakable presence of authority arrived, cutting through the chaos like a knife. The vehicles came to a halt in precise formation, and from one of them emerged General Harris, a four-star general whose reputation for uncompromising discipline and razor-sharp judgment preceded him. His boots hit the ground with a weight that seemed to make the dust itself shiver, and the hum of anticipation rose like a wave across the field. Trainees shifted nervously, unsure whether to stand at attention or remain where they were as the general scanned the crowd. His gaze was unrelenting, piercing straight to the heart of the disruption and finally resting on Sergeant Thompson, who now felt smaller than he ever had in the presence of his men. The sergeant tried to straighten his shoulders, but his jaw twitched slightly, betraying a hint of fear and realization that his moment of unchecked authority was over. Around them the air felt electrified, the sun reflecting off helmets and polished boots giving the scene an almost surreal glow, as if the world had slowed down for the moment when accountability would descend like a hammer. General Harris walked forward, his steps measured, deliberate, and heavy enough to command immediate attention. Every trainee felt the vibration of his presence in their bones as he approached the center of the field, and his eyes swept across each witness, collecting the fragments of truth that had been whispered and murmured in the chaos moments before. The sergeant shifted uneasily under the gaze that seemed to weigh him down, and even the most stoic trainees could feel the tension coiling like a spring ready to snap. The general paused for a heartbeat, taking in the scene, absorbing the posture, expressions, and body language of every individual, present as if nothing could escape his notice. The silence was almost unbearable, broken only by the distant whisper of wind and the faint shuffle of boots on dirt. Morales clutched her arm and felt the sting of what had happened earlier, and at the same time a strange surge of hope that the presence of the general meant something beyond just observation, that justice, or at least intervention, was imminent. She felt the weight of expectation pressing on her chest, as if the outcome of this encounter would ripple far beyond the immediate incident and shape the culture of the training facility for months or years to come. General Harris stopped in front of the sergeant, and the distance between them seemed charged with an invisible force. The sergeant opened his mouth to speak, but words failed him. His throat dry, his hands trembling ever so slightly, and the young recruits around them felt the gravity of the moment, tightening like a noose around their collective awareness. The general looked down at Morales, and then shifted his gaze slowly back to Thompson, and the silence stretched as if time itself were waiting for the inevitable declaration that would alter the course of every life present. The trainees held their breath, some gripping their gear, others staring at the ground, unwilling to meet the gaze of the general but unable to look away from the unfolding scene that seemed both terrifying and thrilling in its intensity. General Harris then began to speak, his voice low but resonant, carrying effortlessly across the field. Each word punctuated with a sense of inevitability and authority that made the ground itself feel solid beneath them and the air around them heavy with tension. He asked pointed questions to witnesses, forcing them to recall every detail of the incident, and the trainees responded cautiously, some with hesitance, others with blunt honesty, as the general absorbed every syllable, and his expression remained unreadable, yet somehow more terrifying for its calmness. Thompson stumbled over his responses, each attempt to justify his actions falling flat as the weight of scrutiny pressed down relentlessly on him. The murmurs of the crowd grew louder, but careful not to attract personal attention. As they watched the confrontation unfold, a silent collective awareness building that this was not just a lesson for the sergeant, but for everyone present about accountability, integrity, and the thin line between authority and abuse of power. Morales felt her heart hammering as she listened to the exchange. The sting in her arm now mingled with a fierce sense of vindication and fear as she realized how close she had come to becoming just another casualty of unchecked anger. The general finally paused, his piercing gaze sweeping across the field as if to remind everyone present that he saw everything. Nothing would escape his notice, and no lie or hesitation would be tolerated. The sergeant swallowed hard, trying to meet the gaze, but finding it impossible, and the field seemed to hold its breath collectively, waiting for the final decision that would set the tone for the rest of the day, and perhaps the careers of all involved. Every muscle in Morales' body tensed, and she could feel the heat of the sun mixing with the adrenaline coursing through her veins, as if preparing her for the next move in a game whose rules had suddenly changed forever. The general took a deliberate step closer to Thompson, and the silence deepened the air, thick with the anticipation of consequence and the knowledge that this was the moment where everything could shift in an instant. The wind picked up, dust swirling around boots and uniforms, giving the impression of a battlefield rather than a training exercise, and every trainee instinctively straightened as if the movement itself might bring disaster or relief depending on the general's next words. Eyes darted from Thompson to Morales and back again, and the trainees could almost feel the pulse of authority vibrating across the ground, making their own hearts beat faster in unison with the invisible rhythm of control and fear. The house. General's voice cut through the charged atmosphere again, low and deliberate, commanding attention and eliciting the truth from even the most reluctant witnesses. Thompson's attempts to answer became increasingly weak, faltering, and his body, language betraying the realization that he had crossed a line that could not be erased with excuses or bravado. Every trainee could feel the tension wrapping around them like a vice, and Morales felt a mixture of vindication, relief, and nervousness, building inside her, knowing that this moment was pivotal, not just for her, but for the integrity of the training itself. The general paused once more, his eyes scanning the field, his expression unreadable yet full of weight and authority, and the silence seemed to thrum like electricity, leaving everyone on edge waiting for the storm that was about to break across the field of discipline and honor. The air was heavy with expectation, dust and heat swirling together as if conspiring to make the moment unforgettable, and every heartbeat felt like it was being recorded in slow motion as the young recruits absorbed the lesson unfolding in front of them about power consequence and the delicate balance between respect and fear. The sergeant's hands twitched slightly, as if reaching for some lost control that no longer existed, and Morales could see the flicker of uncertainty that had replaced arrogance in his posture, and she felt a strange sense of satisfaction tinged with apprehension as she realized the outcome was near and that the ground beneath them held the collective weight of accountability, judgment, and anticipation that would ripple far beyond the moment, leaving everyone suspended in a state of breathless expectation, waiting for the final word from the general. General Harris strode forward, his boots cutting through the silence of the training field, each step deliberate, heavy, and resonant, as if commanding the very air to hold its breath. The dust swirled around. His polished boots and the sun glinted off his insignia, marking him unmistakably as the authority above all else. The sergeant shifted uncomfortably, his muscles tense, his jaw clenched, and his eyes darting nervously toward the general who now stood mere paces away. Morales felt her heart hammering, her palms sweaty, and her legs slightly trembling as she tried to ground herself in the moment, knowing that what was about to happen could change everything for everyone present. Around them, the other trainees stood rigid like statues, some craning their necks to see every nuance of the confrontation, their minds racing with questions about justice, fear, and consequence. The general paused for a heartbeat, taking in the entire scene, absorbing the tension, the whispered rumors, the fear etched into faces, and the lingering shock that had gripped the field since the strike. He looked at Morales, his gaze steady and unwavering, as if reading her thoughts, as well as her pain and anticipation. And she felt a strange mix of relief and intimidation coursing through her like a current that made it hard to breathe. Thompson swallowed hard, his throat dry, his previous confidence now replaced by a creeping dread that made his entire body stiffen. The silence stretched out long and taut, like a wire pulled to the breaking point, and every small sound, the distant flutter of a flag, the scuff of boots against dirt, seemed magnified into a drumbeat of suspense that echoed in the hearts of all present. The general then began to speak, his voice low and controlled, carrying effortlessly across the field, every word deliberate, measured, and laced with authority that made the sergeant flinch, even as the trainees leaned in trying to catch each nuance. He asked questions, direct, pointed, forcing witnesses to recount details, forcing the truth to rise to the surface, and Thompson stammered with each response, his excuses faltering, his posture betraying guilt and fear. The murmurs of the crowd grew louder, but careful not to draw personal attention, as each trainee felt the electric tension build higher with every exchange. Morales felt her pulse sinking with the rhythm of the confrontation, her mind sharp, despite the adrenaline surging. through her veins as she tried to absorb everything and anticipate what the general might do next. The general's gaze cut like steel, his eyes unblinking, scanning every micro-expression, every twitch, every hesitation, as he weighed the weight of authority, responsibility, and discipline across the field. The sergeant shifted his weight nervously, sweat beading on his forehead, his hands curling into fists, then relaxing involuntarily as if trying to reclaim control that had already slipped. Through his fingers, the general took a slow step forward, narrowing the distance between himself and the sergeant, and the air seemed to thrum with an almost tangible energy, like a storm pressing down, waiting to break loose. The trainees held their collective breath, feeling the suspense coil tighter around their spines, and Morales felt a shiver run down her arms as she realized the moment had become a crucible. Not just for Thompson, but for everyone watching, the lessons of courage, restraint, and accountability written into each heartbeat. Each second stretched impossibly long, the weight of authority pressing down, making every trainee acutely aware of their own place in the chain of command and their own capacity for fear or bravery. As the general prepared to render judgment, the sergeant's eyes darted around desperately, looking for some lifeline, some sign that he might escape the consequences of his actions, but there was none. Only the unwavering gaze of General Harris, and the silent, yet powerful anticipation of the trainees who waited to witness the outcome that would define the tone of the training facility for days, months, or even years to come. Morales clenched her fists to steady herself. The sting of the earlier strike now mixed with the growing sense that justice might finally intervene, giving her a strange, adrenaline-fueled clarity about the world she was entering and the standards it demanded. The general paused again, his presence alone commanding. Attention. The silence pressing in so heavily that it seemed to magnify every shallow breath, every nervous shuffle, every heartbeat, until the field itself felt like a suspended cord, vibrating with tension poised on. The edge of release. His gaze lingered on the sergeant, a long, deliberate stare that seemed to strip away layers of arrogance and defiance, exposing the raw fear beneath Thompson's tough exterior, and the young recruits could almost see the cracks, forming in the armor of someone who had thought himself untouchable. The wind picked up, raising dust into small, swirling clouds that danced around boots and legs, making the scene almost cinematic in its intensity, and every trainee felt the suspense tighten around them like a physical force, constricting their chests and sending shivers down their spines. The general's voice broke the silence again, low, deliberate, and cutting through the tension like a blade. He addressed the sergeant directly, challenging his account and forcing him to confront the reality of his actions in a way that left no room for misinterpretation or delay. Each word was a hammer driving home the principle that authority must never be abused, and that the chain of command exists to protect, not intimidate. The sergeant's answers grew weaker, his confidence unraveling with every syllable, and Morales felt a mixture of triumph and apprehension as she realized that the balance of power had shifted irreversibly toward justice. The trainees were completely absorbed in the exchange, some holding their breath, some leaning forward involuntarily, trying to catch every word, every expression, every sign of resolution. The general paused one final time, looking around. The field, as if measuring the collective energy, the tension, the fear and anticipation of all those present before delivering the decision that would seal the moment and leave no doubt about consequences and responsibility. Every heartbeat felt like it was suspended in time. Morales felt the heat of the sun mix with adrenaline, making her skin tingle and her stomach knot as she waited for the storm to break, knowing that whatever came next would ripple through the entire facility, leaving a permanent mark on everyone's memory. Thompson swallowed again, his throat dry, his posture rigid as he sensed the inevitability of what was coming, and the other trainees felt the charged silence pressing in on them like a physical weight-making. It hard to move or speak or even breathe fully. The wind carried the faint sound of distant engines, and the rustle of uniforms, and the entire training ground seemed to hold itself taut like a drawn bowstring waiting for release, and Morales could feel her own pulse echoing the tension as every second stretched into an eternity, leaving the outcome dangling in front of them all like a sword suspended by a single thread. Then, without a word, General Harris raised his hand, and the silence that had pressed down on the training ground became almost unbearable, every recruit frozen, every muscle taut, as if the very air had been electrified. The sergeant swallowed hard his throat, dry his eyes wide and his hands trembling ever so slightly, as if the weight of the moment had settled into his bones. Morales felt a strange rush of adrenaline mingled with fear and relief, her heart hammering in her chest as she realized the moment had arrived that would determine consequences and set the tone for the entire facility. Around them, the wind picked up dust swirling like smoke around boots and uniforms, giving the scene an almost otherworldly intensity, as if the world had slowed down to witness the judgment unfolding. The general's voice finally cut through the silence, low, deliberate, and absolute, carrying across the field, every word imbued with authority and finality. He announced that Thompson was banned from all further training exercises, the weight of the decision hanging in the air like a physical presence, pressing on every shoulder and making every heartbeat feel amplified. The sergeant's face went pale. His jaw dropped slightly, and he seemed to shrink in place as the reality of the ban settled into him, and the trainees could see for the first time the consequences of unchecked anger and the fragility of authority without accountability. Morales felt a mixture of vindication and disbelief coursing through her as she realized that justice had been delivered in a way that none of them would forget, and that the chain of command had not turned a blind eye. The wind whipped around them, scattering papers, hats, and dust, as if nature itself were reacting to the judgment, and every recruit felt the tension ebb, slightly replaced by a nervous energy and a sense of awe at what had just occurred. Thompson tried to speak, but the general's gaze held him immobile, and the words caught in his throat, leaving him powerless and exposed in a way he had never experienced before. The trainees whispered among themselves, their voices low, but charged with the same adrenaline that Morales felt as they processed the outcome and began to understand the stakes of every action and the price of losing. Control. The general turned his eyes slowly across the field as if to remind everyone that accountability extended to all, that no one could escape scrutiny or consequence, and the trainees stiffened instinctively, feeling the invisible weight of authority pressed down on them and the responsibility of carrying themselves with integrity in the face of challenge. Morales could feel the adrenaline and relief coursing through her body, her arms still tingling from the earlier strike, her heart pounding as she realized that this moment marked not just a personal victory, but a collective lesson for everyone present. The sergeant finally lowered his gaze, unable to meet the general's eyes, his pride and arrogance stripped away, leaving only the raw awareness of failure and fear for what might come next in his career or life. The general then gave a subtle nod, signaling that the moment of judgment was complete, and the field seemed to exhale collectively, the tension dissipating, slightly leaving a charged hum of anticipation and reflection. The trainees moved slowly, returning to their positions, their bodies still tense, their minds racing with the implications of what they had witnessed, and Morales felt a strange calm wash over her, mixed with an edge of lingering adrenaline, knowing that the consequences of this day would ripple through every drill, every order, and every interaction from this point forward. The sun glinted off the dust in the air, giving the entire scene a cinematic glow, and the wind carried the faint murmur of voices as everyone processed the outcome and the authority that had just been exercised in a way that left no room for misinterpretation. The sergeant took a small step back his shoulders, slumping slightly, the weight of the band settling heavily on him, and every trainee could sense the vulnerability and the lesson implicit in his fall from unchecked dominance. Morales felt a surge of cautious empowerment, her body tense with residual adrenaline. But her mind clearer now, more aware of the boundaries of authority, and the importance of standing strong even when fear threatened to take hold. The general finally turned his attention to the entire field, his gaze sweeping slowly over. Every recruit, as if sealing the lesson in their minds, ensuring that the gravity of the moment would not be forgotten, and every eye followed his movements, feeling the invisible pressure of responsibility and integrity pressing on them like a tangible force. The silence returned for a heartbeat, before murmurs began to ripple across the trainees as they shared glances and whispered reactions, each understanding that they had witnessed something extraordinary that would shape not just their training, but their approach to authority and courage in ways they could not yet fully comprehend. Morales took a deep breath, her chest rising and falling, her mind buzzing with relief, adrenaline, and the faint thrill of triumph, knowing that this day would be etched into her memory forever, and that the lessons learned here would stay with her long after the dust settled and the field returned to its routine, the echoes of the judgment reverberating through the air and through their hearts, leaving an indelible mark on everyone present.